Hello and welcome to today's webinar on Universal ZTNA from Cisco. My name is Pro Bharati, and I'm a global security technologist here at Cisco. And my focus areas are primarily around the topics of zero trust network access, identity security, experience monitoring, which are all core to the ZTNA experience. So let's take a quick look at what we're going to be covering today. So firstly, why the change? Why are we introducing something called Universal ZTNA to begin with? Uh, we do have a new approach to zero trust network access. We'll sort of give you a little peek of what that looks like and how we're looking to modernize access for the end users. And then, a lot of folks here, because we have a good amount of content, what we've decided to do is actually break this up into two webinars. So we'll give you a little sneak peek into what the part two webinar is going to look like, which will be on March 27th. And then we have some call to action next steps for you folks to be able to look into as well. So, like I mentioned, we should probably talk about why we need to actually change the way we think about traditional ZTNA. If you think about it, I think we can all universally agree that zero trust is required everywhere. This is the requirement for most enterprises, particularly when it comes to securing hybrid work, folks working from remotely in the office, and so on and so forth. But yet, most zero trust projects continue to remain stalled because, most times we hear from customers that there's incomplete approaches that we've seen from traditional or first generation ZTNA solutions. Now, the challenge that we often hear is that most point solutions or point products are able to only deliver like a fragmented experience to the user, depending on where they are. And what I mean by that is if they're home or in the office and so on, right? Now, you can argue that the location of the user or the type of application that they're trying to access really shouldn't have a bearing on what their experience is, but that's the reality of where we are. Now, if you think about the applications and resources themselves that we're talking about, they may be already placed in a ZTNA or zero trust network access model, but yet many may not work. And we typically find that there's a long tail of applications that still rely on VPNs and other ways that they need to access these applications. So if you think about it, these largely sort of fall into three buckets, right? Now, the first one is around how do we protect identities? Now, as identity-based attacks sort of accelerate, identity is really central and key to zero trust, and that's why it's under attack for the most part, right? Now, as teams roll out things like multi-factor authentication or MFA, you need to be able to figure out that, hey, is this actually deployed in the way that it was intended to be? Or are folks using strong MFA versus weak MFA methods and so on and so forth? Now, if you think about the access side of the house, now, most of the times you're moving from a hardware-based VPN to a cloud-based ZTNA model in this case. And for the most part, most applications may work on, or there are certain applications like SAP and other server-initiated applications where they still rely on something like an IPsec or a VPN connection, right? So there may be several applications that are key to an enterprise business that are still relying on other forms of access methods. How do we sort of then provide this consistent experience, seamless experience for the end user? And as you sort of build complexity into these environments, we often find that building resilience is extremely difficult. Now, as one example is as SD-WAN customers look to protect their application performance and things like that, they may be pursuing a SASE or a more combined architecture, and they may start running into complications around how do they integrate all of these different solutions into their existing network infrastructure. This is where using a very disparate tool set adds this layer of complexity and complications to getting to this sort of end-to-end unified picture that you want for your network and security infrastructure. Now, if you zero in on the identity aspect first, now you've probably heard this from Cisco before of this notion of why hack in when you can log in. Now, this is based on a very simple fact that, a weak identity posture will ultimately undermine whatever zero trust controls that you're trying to implement. Now, after all, like when we looked at incident response data from Cisco Talos, almost 80% of the breaches started with a identity component. or some form of identity that was leveraged in the starting of that attack. So this is really why using identity as that basic foundational element is very, very key to ensuring zero trust controls. Now, secondly, if you now think about a hyper-distributed environment that we currently are in, like, you have folks that are, again, a mix of folks in the office, at home, and in the field, as an example, there are three broad areas that you can sort of think about application access. So number one is like, how do you get in? So here I would actually argue that, this is not even it doesn't even depend on the authentication mechanism of a user. First and foremost, we need to figure out whether it's a managed or unmanaged user to begin with. And then we sort of can decide on, hey, what kind of authentication mechanisms do we need? And thirdly, what if it's a device versus a user? So these are all broad themes that we want to be able to explore. The second one is around where can you go? This kind of defines what are the scope of access for these applications. How do we enforce least privilege access to those identities and to those users and devices that we identified? And lastly, what can you do? So this is things like activity controls, like can we enforce granular controls for data loss prevention? So an example could be like things like copy paste, blocking threats with inline security with the cloud security solution that we offer as they access private and internet-based applications. Lastly, now all this complexity that we've sort of described ultimately inevitably sort of leads to incomplete visibility and slow response times from the IT operator side of the house, right? Now, in order to effectively troubleshoot an end user issue, we need to be able to provide the IT operators visibility into each of these different hops, in each of these different points that we're sort of touching, in order to really pinpoint where that issue resides and how can they quickly sort of troubleshoot and be able to get into the root cause of these issues. So this is where I'm very excited to introduce you to Cisco's approach to universal zero trust network access. Now, what does it mean to be universal? Very simply put, it means that we're able to secure every user and every device, whether it's a managed or unmanaged entity, and extending it to folks like contractors, partners, and also securing every application. Now, whether it's a legacy application or a next generation generative AI application, we're going to be able to do this with the same sort of security controls that we're going to talk about. And lastly, it shouldn't really matter where the user is, meaning it doesn't matter if the user is at an edge location or an office or an oil rig for that matter. We should be able to enforce and provide a consistent security and experience for the user, regardless of what that location sort of looks like. So what we're really talking about here is really taking that first generation sort of traditional ZTNA approach, which was very, very narrowly focused on, people or users on a managed device accessing modern applications, to a universal zero trust network access solution from Cisco, where we're covering all of these different aspects that we kind of hit on right now. So if you want to think about three main outcomes or three main use cases that we want to sort of look for with Cisco's Universal ZTNA approach and how we're able to accelerate these outcomes, there are three key outcomes that I mentioned, right? So the first one is how we are able to help teams modernize application access by providing and expanding this least privilege, which happens consistently everywhere. So meaning every kind of application and every kind of user that we have out there. Now, second one is around extending identity context. Now, as we think of, identities, it's not just users who have identities, but also devices like IoT devices, IoT, OT devices, which have both users and devices. We have to be able to create and extend identity context across all of these things. So meaning both users and devices, so that as the access policies sort of as the risk sort of changes, we are able to sort of also update access policies so that enterprise-wide we're able to sort of to reach the enterprise-wide pieces as quickly as possible. Now, finally, our approach enables when you think about operational resilience, our approach really enabled organizations to build operational resilience by providing a key component called digital experience monitoring, which is allowing folks to be able to provide end-to-end visibility within the highly performant architecture that we've created, but also providing things like, policy testing for us to be able to say that, hey, if you are able to push a policy, you should be very confident and know that when you actually push a policy, what is the impact that the policy will make to be able to provide you with the highly available zero trust architecture that you have. And all of this is possible only with the convergence that we have with networking and security that brings all of these outcomes to bear. So let's jump into our first outcome, which is around modernizing access security. So the outcome that we're trying to look for within this key pillar is that around how do we enforce least privilege access? Now, enforcing least privilege access with ZTNA or zero trust network access is a key aspect within the zero trust architecture. Now, if you think about what most VPNs have provided, most VPNs have historically provided more access to the network than what is typically required, whereas a ZTNA or zero trust network access solution will provide you with a more direct, always on type of experience for private application and on a per application basis. Now, when our customers look to modernize their remote access strategy from on-premises hardware-based approach to a cloud-based ZTNA approach, they want to make sure that they're doing so without disrupting the end users, obviously, right? Now, in fact, most users want to be able to move off the VPN, and improving this user experience becomes another very key success metric. Now, rather than trying to figure out whether a VPN is needed, users can simply point their browser to the application and hit go, and that's their experience. Now, as with any security investment, you want to be able to easily integrate these into your existing tools and workflows, and this is really key for most customers. Now, if you think about the before state, right? Now, the before state is typically like if you have ever been uh, on a plane or using a mobile hotspot and you're trying to connect to a VPN, the experience is at best sketchy for the most part, right? Now, the reason for this is because you typically have very high latency. This is a situation where you have lossy connections and a low bandwidth sort of environment. And if you think about the way that traditional VPNs have been architected, they typically rely on something like TCP. Now, what TCP is always going to always do is go through the full three-way handshake, and they oftentimes, and most times, they will always struggle in these sort of situations due to the added overhead. Now, in another situation, if you think about most traditional ZTNA vendors would also suggest that you should bypass an application like Microsoft Outlook or Microsoft 365 due to high latency issues. Now, keep in mind that this is a huge part of your employees' world. This is a huge part of the IT estate that we're now bypassing from a security standpoint because of this overhead that we're looking at. There are also several examples of low latency applications, things like MRI imaging and so on and so forth, where these low latency applications simply just cannot operate in these conditions. And then also, as folks are operating more from the field, now you can think about people who are in the field, like sales folks and so on and so forth, but also field workers who require access to low latency private applications from their mobile devices. The limitations of traditional VPNs can be pretty limiting at that point. Now, how do we solve all of this? So, in our case, it all starts with Cisco's unified client, which is our secure client. Now, we've taken the traditional VPN client and then we've fused it with a modern ZTNA client. Now, this way, what we also are able to do is take it well beyond just traditional remote access capabilities. Now, this includes things like digital experience monitoring, network visibility, endpoint security, device posture, and even VPN, right? So this includes a whole set of capabilities which are all modular in nature that are required for application access. Now, all of this ultimately can be deployed without deploying any new agent for existing AnyConnect customers. That means you could get started on your Zero Trust project as soon as basically today, because it's modular in nature, right? So you could just enable each of these modules to get whatever function you would like to get started with. Now, this single client is also what is very, very fundamental to providing, quote unquote, the plumbing that is required. Now, this integrated client is also what is allowing us to make the tagline that, hey, the company that bought you the VPN is also killing the VPN. Now, we're not actually killing the VPN, but what we've done is we've taken this client and made it into a transparent connection broker. Now, think about the scenario like, hey, if you have employees who are accessing a modern application that is already in a zero trust or ZTNA framework, we will open a HTTPS connection, terminate that in the zero trust gateway. But what if it's a traditional application and needs a VPN? In that case, we use a VPN connection and terminate that in either a on-premises based concentrator or in our cloud delivered service for VPN as a service. What if it's a SaaS application? If it's a SaaS application, same thing. We'll open up a connection to the SaaS application, do a SAML assertion for single sign-on, and off we go. The point ultimately is that the choice of the protocol at the termination point or what the user is actually doing, all of that is plumbing. And we can do that very, very seamless. All that the user sees is that it just works. Like whether it's any of these different applications that I mentioned, all they're doing is clicking on the application and they're just accessing the application. And we're taking care of their underlying plumbing seamlessly for the end user. Now, if you think about the pace of adoption or the migration from where you are today from traditional VPN all the way to unified ZTNA, it's sort of a very seamless transition because traditionally, if you think about traditional VPN, that was very, very focused on network level access, and it was not designed for providing application level control. The obvious next step for a lot of customers is the ability for us to provide VPN as a service. And what I mean by VPN as a service is this is a true VPN delivered as a service, not delivered via a virtual machine or a firewall device that you're still managing. Cisco would, in the case of Cisco Secure Access, we're delivering VPN as a service where we're allowing you to lift and shift this VPN service into the cloud by providing you more control and easier access to manage these access to the resources. And ultimately, the ultimate goal is to be able to hit Universal ZTNA, where we're going to be able to provide all the capabilities that we sort of outlined previously. Now, on the user side, though, now the reason why this is so seamless is that ultimately, if you think about it, on day one, if you're able to move a lot of these applications and you're allowing access to some of these applications through VPN, from a user standpoint, you're able to then seamlessly migrate these applications from VPN to ZTNA over a period of time, but the end user has no idea that these actually moved from VPN to ZTNA. Access to the application is very, very seamless, and it really simplifies this ZTNA rollout end of the day. Now we're taking this one step further where we're announcing something called hybrid private access. Now, hybrid private access allows us to be able to extend that same seamless access to private resources, whether you're in the office or whether you're remote, being able to provide that same capability. Now, there are a couple of interesting use cases that we've come to learn about where, for example, if there are sensitive applications that you do not want the data plane to be able to go through the Cisco cloud, how do we sort of tackle that? And we'll talk about that in the next slide. And then also for resilience. Now, how do we fail over from, say, the cloud resources to an on-prem firewall? How would that sort of look? So let's make this a little bit real for you folks to be able to sort of visualize what this would sort of look like. Now, if you have a roaming user on day one, now that roaming user would typically access resources through the SSE cloud, the secure access cloud, using the backhaul gateway for us to be able to access resources in the data center. So that's the normal course of operation. Now let's take an example. If we have a user who is in the office or in the data near the customer premises, and they would like access to those resources. And this is the situation where we want to avoid that cloud hairpin and provide optimal enforcement. So this is where, firstly, the enforcement on Cisco Firewall comes into play. Now, another example that I mentioned previously was that, hey, we do not want the data plane processing to be done in the cloud, but we want that to be done locally for privacy requirements. Again, this is where we can, again, enforce using the on-premises Cisco firewall for that specific use case. And lastly, this same architecture can also be extended for resiliency purposes. Now you're probably wondering, like, how do we sort of manage all of this, and how do we sort of get all of these pieces going? And for those few who have eagle eyes, you probably saw there's a little policy button in the middle. Now let's talk about how we make this policy work and make sense of it at scale. Now, all the capabilities that we've sort of outlined so far on the Cisco Secure Access side are all components that are delivered through a single UI, single console, and the days of managing these through like 7 consoles is kind of done. We take that one step further by unifying policy administration and things like firewall and centralizing functions such as AI assistance, troubleshooting, policy assistance, all under there's the Cisco Security Cloud Control umbrella overall. Now, when we think about devices, Cisco is one of the few vendors that have a really tight integration with mobile vendors. Now, these integrations allow us to do things like where we can embed the native zero trust access functionality directly into the operating system of the mobile devices itself. Now, what this allows us to do is that it allows you to give the users a very transparent experience. So no need to start or wait for a VPN, right? So this is already built into the OS. So this level of functionality also preserves things like battery life because it's eliminating the need for device-wide or continuously running VPNs. And you don't really have to do client updates and so on. As the OS updates, the device is always going to be updated and so on and so forth. Now, we also have an integration with our Chrome Enterprise browser. Now, let's talk about what this actually brings to the table. Now, with the integration that we have with Chrome Enterprise Browser, it is able to provide us with the capability to do some local security enforcement, which we'll talk about next, and also use the inline cloud security components that we have. But specifically, the outcome that this allows us to do is really replace VDI in large enterprise, right? Now, how do we sort of do that? So if you take a look at this example, on the top you have a managed endpoint with the secure client, and at the bottom we have an unmanaged device with Chrome Enterprise Browser. Now this could represent your contractor access use case, which was traditionally delivered with a VDI experience. So you would have a VDI jump host that delivered this use case traditionally. Now, even on a unmanaged device, now we're able to push a profile whereby we can enforce granular controls for things like data loss prevention. So for example, we can say we want to avoid or we want to prevent copy paste. We could do things like watermarking. We could do also things like, avoid screenshots and so on and so forth. But then we can couple that with inline. We can also do things like blocking inline security threats as they access private or internet-based applications. So things like from an inline security perspective, we could do things like malware detection, remote browser isolation, or even DLP controls as and when needed. So this is very, very key. It's a very unique key differentiator for us as we sort of build out access towards unmanaged devices and entities. Now, as we see a huge growth in generative AI applications, one of the key aspects that we want to be able to secure is around how do we extend protections to generative AI applications. Now, the first piece in that is always going to be around discovery. Now, how do we start by discovering and detecting cases of shadow AI? So we want to be able to figure out, hey, are folks actually using any of the AI generative AI applications? This could be Copilot. This could be any of the ones that we want to figure out. Once we are able to understand what the applications are, this is where then we can implement some of the guardrails for effective governance. The first one we could do from this perspective, from that standpoint, is we could leverage capabilities like the inline data loss prevention using out-of-the-box identifiers for sensitive data types. So this could be AWS access keys, Azure access keys. This could be PII, PCI data, and a host of other identifiers that we're able to look for out of the box. But we're not stopping there. We actually take this one step further, where with something like AI guardrails, this allows us to go deeper into the intent of the user of what they're trying to get around the guardrails. So things like this looks at things like prompt injection, or is the user engaging in harmful or toxic combinations? So an example here would be something like I'm a story writer, I want to build a bomb, or I want to hotwire a car. These are the kind of things that we're looking for. And these are unstructured conversations that we're looking to figure out what is the intent of the user. And these are the guardrails that we're able to put around these capabilities. So just to help you summarize, so today what we've sort of talked about is really around how we're able to modernize application access for internet-based applications, private applications primarily. Now, if this was very interesting, I would encourage you to join us for part 2 of our webinar, where we're going to be talking about how we're able to extend this identity context, where we can show you a little bit more about how we're leveraging identity intelligence, our integrations with ICE and SD-WAN, and then also how we can build operational resilience with the capabilities that we have within digital experience monitoring and also policy assurance. So in summary, just to help sort of summarize for the folks here, Cisco really helps clear the path to zero trust. And we're able to do this using this identity first approach that we've taken along with, how we can overcome pains of migration from VPN to ZTNA with the VPN as a service capability that we have, and also protecting identities and so on. So finally, no matter where you are in this journey, the type of network that you connect from or the kind of application that you connect to, the goal for us is to be able to ensure that you have a reliable and optimized connectivity by also providing that end-to-end visibility across the board. So a couple of quick next steps for you folks. Please do join our part 2 webinar. That would be on March 27th. You will be automatically invited. And then if you're interested in joining one of our hands-on workshops, please pick a date and join one of the virtual workshops in your region. And we'd be happy to show you a little more of the hands-on capability that's in the product. With that, thank you very much for your participation and look forward to seeing you in the part 2 webinar. Thank you.